My guest, Ashley Patek, is an occupational therapist, a parent and life coach. And I mean, a parent, a parent and life coach also. She's an empathetic witnessing practitioner and the founder of Doing Better Conscious Parenting, which is a nurturing community for parents dedicated to breaking punitive generational cycles. And with a profound understanding that our own childhood experiences shape our parenting style, Ashley empowers parents to reparent themselves and raise their children with consciousness and connection. She offers private coaching and interactive workshops as well. And today, she's going to talk about the struggle to fit in. And I just love this topic so much. Being a neurodiverse person, this has been something that I've felt acutely for like my entire life. So, and so it's something that, like, children and adults all struggle with, and no one really tells you, as an adult, how to fit in. So, first of all, what causes this struggle to fit in?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I love talking about this topic is because it is so universal. I think we have all felt left out or isolated at one point in our life. And, you close your eyes and you think of a time, like you feel it in your body, you have a visceral reaction. And I feel like being left out is like the shadow side of connection. We're constantly talking about how can we become more connected. And also, I think equally important is the conversation we're having today of like, well, what do you do when you feel left out? Because today might not be your day, but eventually, at some point in your life, whether real or perceived, you will feel left out.
Yeah.
So, what causes it really starts back in a conversation with our ancestors. Back in the day, in order to survive, which is the primary goal, we had to be part of the pack. If you had physical injury, it likely meant death. But also, if you were kicked out of the group, that also could equal death, right? And so you fast forward now, and the situations are different, but the wiring is still the same. In fact, recent imaging shows that physical pain and emotional pain light up the same areas of the brain. And so I think that's why sometimes when we feel rejected, it kind of feels like we're dying inside, like a piece of us is dying, because it's like connecting to the same parts of the brain. And what we're looking for is to belong, because connection equals safety and disconnection equals threat, right?
Yeah.
And so we do it from the earliest moments of trying to fit in to our environment. When we're children, we're constantly asking ourselves unconsciously, what does this family system, mom, dad, brother, sister, who do they need me to be? And who do I have to be? What parts of me to grow and what parts of me to shrink so that I can stay part of the pack? And then we get a little older, right? And then that gaze grows a bit and we're starting to say, well, what do my friends want of me? How do they want me to dress? And how do they want me to talk? And then we get a little older and we say, well, what does society want of me? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a human? And so we're constantly going back for that acceptance, that belonging, because that's how we feel safe biologically.
Yeah.
And so it's like in our DNA to feel part of some sort of community and to feel loved, because to us that equals safety.
And not for nothing, I've been watching that special on blue zones, and one of the overarching things that the blue zones have in common, where people live to be over 100, is that community. They're very tight. They're constantly interacting with people, and on on a metaphysical level, I believe that our longing for community, spiritually is this return, this desire to return to this oneness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay, in this radical acceptance. So, yeah, I love this conversation. It's just so on point with like where I'm at in all my other conversations, really, because I am like on the community thing. Let's do the community thing.
Yes. Oh, it's so important. And what's so fascinating to me as I studied people's behavior and their patterns is that our body, because it's so wired to survive, if it feels a threat of like, oh gosh, they don't like me, oh gosh, did I say the wrong thing? Or oh gosh, I might get kicked out, or I might feel the sting of rejection or disapproval, our body unconsciously and automatically adapts. There is something inside each of us that our body tends to default to. And
Mm,
I find it interesting when we feel that sting of rejection or isolation, like just noticing what our patterns are. Some of us are like, we lessen our boundaries. Some of us, we might overdo or overgive. If I give, then they're going to know I'm a good person and I'm worthy of being in. We'll shift and adapt and maybe change the way we talk or think or believe or filter what we say, in order to feel that connection. And so
yeah.
it's so
And some people will
fascinating.
light the bridge on fire and find connection someplace else. I
Totally.
didn't need those people anyway.
Right. And then that case, we're almost actually doing to them what they're doing to us. Like they're
Yeah,
kicking us out, and so we're like, well, then we're kicking them out because we all
yeah.
want to belong.
Right.
It's like Hunger Games, for of
Mhm.
connection. Oh, so, and that's really interesting to me too, is because people will say, well, why are they leaving me out? They must be mean girls. They must be bad
Mm.
people. And I've actually, through watching different patterns, I've actually come up with 4 things that I've noticed that tend to be the cause of people leaving other people out, because
Oh,
their
lay it
behavior,
on us. Lay it on
yeah,
us.
yeah, because behavior it's symptomatic, right? It's
Yeah.
it's communication of something that's going on internally. And so the first is what we normally think of and what we're talking about here is that we will do what we have to do to stay on the in, even if that means pushing someone else on the out, right?
Mm.
And really what's happening there is their need to fit in is just as strong as yours. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but what's happening here is, again, that primal instinct is kicking in of, I've got to stay in at all costs, right? So that's the
Mhm.
first one. The second
So would you
one,
say that's kind of like a territoriality then? Like I have to stay in at all costs, and sometimes that means I can't let you come in because that might threaten my position.
yeah. And you'll see it with kids too. You'll see it with kids of like, I like person A, B, and C, but if I invite A and B, like if I invite A and B and there's 3 of us, well, then there's a chance, there's a fear inside me that I could be the one who gets left out, and they
Yeah.
play together more. So I'm just not
Yeah.
going to invite the other person, even though I like them, because I don't want to risk the chance that they'll hit it off, or that they'll
Mhm.
develop a stronger friendship, or that they'll connect and I'll be over here on the outside. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting. And that's why I invite my children and even myself to look and become curious of like, what does it feel like in my body to be left out? And I wonder if I could get curious. Like, why do I imagine that they're leaving me out? I may not know, but I might be able to make an empathetic guess.
Yeah.
And so these 4 patterns, I talk to my kids about them. And the second is sometimes hurt people people who are hurting, they hurt other people,
Yeah.
right? They feel so out of control that they try to control what they can, and or what has been modeled to them is painful. And so
Yeah.
they're using the skills that they know, which is really the third one. Like they're missing, or they have a lagging skill. And maybe they weren't shown connection and empathy. Maybe they weren't shown how to express their feelings of like, hey, I just need some space right now, or, you know, so a lagging skill. And then the last one is actually really the most fascinating to me, which is they actually do know how to state what they want and need, and they're setting a boundary. They're saying, wow, I know that I function better when there's a smaller crowd. So instead of inviting my whole class to my birthday party, I'm going to invite 3 people, you know? And so I think that that in itself is a skill that we can practice and teach our kids, of how to notice what you want and need, and to still set a boundary that in a respectful way. You know, it's that difference between being inclusive, but also not taking on responsibility for everyone else's feelings, of feeling like, oh my gosh, even though it's going to overwhelm my system, I have to invite everybody. So
Gotcha.
I think that's why being left out is such a complex and juicy topic.
Yeah, yeah. So more often than not, it's not even necessarily about the person that's feeling left out. It's about the dynamics in the group or the dynamics within that individual. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the person that does, feel left out? Like what are some awarenesses or some tips that they can do to kind of like break into the pack a little bit without losing themselves?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is maybe the difference of fitting in and belonging, right?
Mm,
I think that, Dr. Brene Brown talks about this, about there being a difference. Fitting
yeah,
in is us adapting who we are to be liked or accepted. I want
yeah.
to notice what they're dressing, what they're wearing, what they're eating, what's cool, what's not, and I'm going to be like them.
Mhm.
Belonging is when you get to be your authentic self and you're loved and accepted for that. And
Oh, yeah.
so I
Mhm.
think, in my opinion, what we're seeking is to belong. But what often happens is we're trying to fit in.
Yeah,
Mm,
such a just great breakdown of that. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Which fitting in is, at least in my experience, it's like a double kick in the ass, because when you do, or if you do get rejected by those people you're trying to fit in with, it's like, well, hell, now I don't have them, but I've also lost me. Like,
Right.
and so what my tools, some things that I say is just first explore that relationship you have with feeling rejected.
Mm,
Like, notice who you feel safe with and who you feel like you have to perform for, right?
yeah.
Um, it's so important. And I even noticed the rejected little girl inside of me coming out when I have, a disagreement with my husband. We have very different attachment styles. And so his mode of coping is shutting down. And the
Mhm.
story I wrap around that fact is, well, he's being so cold. And why is he shutting me out? And I go into this whole narrative. And that's the rejected part of me. That little girl who felt rejected, that's her. Like, oh
Mhm.
no, and I'm grasping. And so one thing is just to notice how rejection feels in your body, and notice who you can belong with and who you're trying to fit in with, right? Because one's the
Mm.
truth and one's an illusion. But also maybe asking yourself, what's the facts happening here? And what's the story I'm creating about them? So in the case
Yes.
of my husband, it's like, the fact is he was feeling overwhelmed, actually about things that didn't even have to do with me.
Mhm.
And he was shutting down, trying to process and cope.
Mhm.
The story I created around that was, he's rejecting me. He's not letting me into his inside world. And so I then respond to him in my own protective responses, which causes him to shut down more. And then round and round we go. And I think this happens very often to
Oh,
most of
it's
us.
so common, so common. And
Yeah.
that dynamic in particular.
Mm.
I love this this concept, this, of, looking at the difference between belonging and fitting in, and, really sitting with that little inner person that has
Mm.
been rejected in the past or has felt left out in the past, and then this craving that we have to belong, and really kind of self-reflecting on, am I just wanting to belong, or am I trying to fit in? I think that that's a great process that all of us could go through sometimes, you
Yeah.
know. So, like, I'm curious, like, I know that there are certain neurodiversities that play a role in this, autism and ADHD, especially with women, they have a tendency to mask more.
Mm.
It's that unconscious way to fit in because they just don't know how, so they're kind of, but also the rejection sensitive dysphoria that sometimes comes with ADHD, where everything seems like a rejection,
Yeah.
even though it's really not. So that's just another filter that those people, including myself, get to play with. And
Right.
woo! Um,
Yay.
so I'm curious, like, so I know from experience that neurodiversity plays a role in this, and I'm curious if anything else plays a role
Mm.
in this, desire to fit in.
I see it also in deeply feeling children. And deeply feeling children are the children who, well, they feel things more deeply.
Yeah.
They might bump their leg and it outwardly look very minor, but they're on the ground screaming and crying. They're the children that when you try to sit with them and empathize with their feelings, they become more dysregulated. They're the ones who you can't really ask too many questions to. And embarrassment automatically correlates with shame for them. I
Mm,
see this so often because they're computing sometimes even your bids for connection as
yeah.
rejection or manipulation or mocking. And so there's a whole set of tools just for deeply feeling children. But that concept of shame and embarrassment is really interesting. I think sometimes that if we as children were able to have the opportunity to notice the discomfort that comes with feeling left out,
Mhm.
then maybe we'd be having different feelings and thoughts about it and as adults and tying it less to our self-worth. Because if you ever
Yeah.
think about it, like I'll say for me, there was an instance my 4-year-old, he was really upset because he had said some kids left him out and they were kind of making fun of his hair, which I don't know how they could. He's adorable. But the thing is, right, that's what we want to do. As
Mhm.
our kids come to us and say, oh, mama, they left me out, or mama, they didn't invite me to the party, we want to do one of two things. We either want to be like, well, they're not a good friend anyway, so you don't want to be friends with them. Like, right? We automatically try to kick them out of our group. Or we rush in to fix it. Well, you know what? I'm sure that they really didn't mean it. Or you know what? I'm going to call their mother. Or,
Mhm,
right? And
mhm.
what
Mm.
happens when that happens? Well, our kids are already embarrassed and feeling maybe shameful. And when we try to fix it, we compound that. We also compound the fear of like, holy crap, this is now a crisis. It is so big and so bad that my mom has to step in and fix it.
Wow, yeah,
Oh, being left
yeah,
out is not okay. I must be
right.
included, right? There's a lot of that happens. And the other flip of the coin is what if we just sat on the bench with our kids and met them where they are instead of trying to pull them to our happy bench or like it's an okay bench. And we
Mm-hmm.
just said, wow, I know this hard feeling. I felt it too. Yep, it's hard. You'll get through it. But for now, we can just sit on the bench together. And you're
Yeah.
not trying to fix it. You're not trying to rationalize it. Because the thing is, as we've talked about, this is so universal that if your kids don't feel left out today, there will be a time that they
Mm-hmm.
will. And I'd rather my kids learn the skills to notice what that feels like and cope now than to be 37 and still trying to talk to that rejected inner child part of me that never
Right.
learned those skills. And
And
so,
the desire to fix also, it leaves one kind of feeling disempowered, right?
mm,
If someone has to come in and fix me, then there's something wrong with me and I'm not going to get this right. So if we're trying to fix this not fitting in thing, like, then they're actually not going to have the skills to really discern that belonging when they run
mm,
across it, because they're not going to trust themselves in that situation.
mm, so true, so true. Our kids begin to look at it as like, oh gosh, fitting in is the thing to do.
Mhm.
Really, it goes back to that belonging, like being your authentic self and knowing that not everybody's going to understand it or to accept it. And what if instead of making that bad and wrong, and now I'm not saying this is an easy ask, but what if we looked at it as that's just part of the human experience? There's love,
Yes,
there's pain, there's asserting
yes.
yourself. People might criticize that. There's all these polarities. What if on the other side of belonging was sometimes not fitting in?
Mhm.
And could we be okay with that?
Yeah.
It again, big ask, but
Yeah, I think that we as humans, maybe it is because of the pain receptors, in the
mm,
brain, for emotional pain. Like, we just do everything we can to avoid emotional pain. And so we'd rather not be uncomfortable. We'd rather not just be with and sit in the suck for a minute. Um, but that's really where, like, there's a gold mine of information for us. That's where we can really learn about ourselves and our capabilities. That's where we, grow,
build
is in those.
resilience.
Yeah, our
Yeah.
resilience. Yeah.
Mm,
So, the more we can kind of just be with, these uncomfortable emotions of, like, embarrassment and shame, like you were saying, and, being present when we're feeling left out and that kind of thing, like, the power that comes from that is just amazing, you
mm.
know.
It is. And I once heard, and I didn't create this myself, but I use it often, is that pain is not a hot potato where we're like, whoop, on to you, whoop, like pass it on before the music stops, It's a traveling professor. It is a teacher when we let it be
Mm,
a teacher. And I am not saying compound the pain for your kids or make sure they really feel it. But I'm saying we also don't have to fix it. And so when my son came to me and said, Mama, they left me out,
mhm.
I just knelt in with curiosity. How
Yeah.
did you feel? I felt sad. Where did your sadness live when it was visiting you? Well, it felt it he goes, in my heart and my eyes. And I said,
Mm,
that's a hard feeling, isn't it? He's like, yep. And I just sat there with him. And then I asked him if he wanted to hear a story, and he did. And the story was about a time that I got left out. So intergenerational stories can be a really powerful tool and really working on many skills with our kids. But in this particular subject, because then they're no longer the main character. They're
yeah.
invested because they care about you, but they're not the main character. So it's like they're watching a movie as opposed to like really living it. And
Yeah.
you can talk about what it felt like for you so that you are building connection as opposed to more isolation around the feeling of being left out. And then normalizing that it happens. It happens to everyone. It happens to
Yeah.
mama. And like, I'm still here. And the next thing we did is what I had mentioned earlier is like, why do you imagine those boys left you out? And it's really fascinating, and they may not know, and you may not know, but it's really fascinating sometimes when we give our kids that question. Like when I ask my kids tough questions, I'm not looking for really philosophical, like really big answers. I'm just
Right.
planting the seed on how to ask those questions for themselves in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And what he responded with was, well, I saw a daddy yell at the kid, at one of the boys, and then he felt angry, and he goes, maybe he didn't like being yelled at, so he yelled at me and left me out.
Mm,
That's what he said. And I said, maybe,
maybe.
and so we talked about some different things it could be. It may have had nothing to do with the parent who had a bad, had a hard moment and yelled. Like it may not have, but just
Mm-hmm.
problem solving some different things. And then the last part was, well, what do you want to need? Like, what do you want to need, Zeke? Like, do you want to, be yourself and say to him, like, hey, I see you might be hurting, or, you know, and like try to be a friend? Or do you feel like you want to set a boundary and say, like, hey, I didn't like when you talked to me that way? And so
Mm-hmm.
just teaching our kids to notice what they want to need and creating a dialogue around that. Like, hey, I
Yeah.
really felt sad when you told me I couldn't play with you. I wonder
Yeah.
why you asked that. Or, hey, I didn't like the way that felt in my body, and I won't let you talk to me that way. So, just teaching our kids how to notice what they want to need and feel and then communicate it respectfully. I think that in itself is a form of connection, even if the other person isn't interested, is that
I love
I
it.
connected with myself. And
Yeah.
that is the most powerful relationship. And the people who really are meant to belong with me will receive that. Big lesson to teach a kid. I'm not saying we achieved
Yeah.
all that in one experience, but I think for all of us is a journey that we're walking. Is what if I could learn to accept myself and know that I won't abandon myself, and that the right people will align for me and love me and accept me just as I am. And maybe that, what if that. So
Yeah. I really love how your parenting coaching, you know, it really it just really works on all of us because we all have those little wounded kids in us. And I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking, gosh, I really wish I had someone like you when I was a kid, like because I just think like your son's really blessed and the people that work with you, their kids are really blessed because you know, this whole thing of like, having these tools of self-reflection and what's real and what's not real and what are the facts and what are the stories we're making on those facts and like all of that just so powerful. And I know that all of us listening are relating and we're like, oh yeah, that's something really great that I can use today. um I'm curious. So, is there a difference in like, genders that experience the struggle to fit in or, you know, ages? Like, is there any other like role that really like influences
mm.
this desire to fit in? I'm going to assume middle school. I'm just going to like lump middle school puberty
Oh,
right in there.
I'm not looking forward particularly to when my kids get to that. I feel a little nervous. It's already hard at 4 and 6. Well, I know like research says that typically spikes in isolation happen something different than I actually thought. Because I thought, obviously, like, yeah, when those hormones are surging, but actually the 20s, the mid 50s, and the late 80s.
Mm,
However, I it is universal. And I think that men and women, I think no matter how you identify, whether you have neurodiversities or not, like I think that we all feel it. and maybe we internalize it in different ways, and maybe we create our own protective mechanisms.
Mm.
But I think it just happens. And for some people, it happens very early on. I think one of the best tools we can give our kids is to create a space where they belong in the home. Like some of us are trying to perform and fit in for mom and dad, or brother, sister, grandma, caretaker. Some of us don't experience that until we're 4 and getting left out on the playground. Some of us don't experience it until, that boy or that girl or that partner rejects us. I mean, or I got overlooked for the job. I think it comes in so many different forms and in
Yeah.
so many different ways. I feel like there's levels to being left
Yeah.
out. You know what
I
I'm
could see
saying?
that in the 20s for sure, because they're adjusting to adulthood and they're still trying to like figure out who they are. That's like an intense learning process of who I am and where do I fit in society and what's my role supposed to be. And I can totally see that. And then like the mid 50s you said, well, I guess
Mm-hmm.
that's something I can look forward to in a year or two. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Um yeah.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I just think that there's just varying levels of it,
Mhm.
micro and macro
Yeah.
isolation.
I could even think back. I'm certain there was a time as a parent where was in the moment dysregulated and trying to fit in with my kids, you
Mm,
know, and feeling that kind of what's my place here,
yeah.
with these kids. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
motherhood was the biggest culture shock for
Hmm.
me personally, because there's that shift in identity. There's a reforming of your outline, I suppose. And society seemed, for me, in my experience, to have it feel like there was two things you could be as a mother. You could be a good mom if you were a martyr and sacrificed all your wants and needs
Right.
and were completely selfless,
Hmm.
um, and put all your dreams and stuff on hold, and that is a good mom. But there was also this camp of like, a good mom is out there providing for her family. She's in the workforce. She's being a boss. Like, she's doing it. And
Hmm.
I actually get mothers who will say to me quite often, well, Ashley, which am I supposed to be? I say,
Mm.
well, where do you feel like you belong? Like, what do you want and need? Is your body calling you to be spending time home with your kids and staying at home and homeschooling? Is your body calling you to be in the workforce? Is your body calling for something in between? What
Hmm.
works for you and your family? Because there's not one right way. And that took me time to learn. That
Yeah.
mom guilt, that guilt is so real. And then I realized, like, that guilt isn't even mine. Like, true guilt to me is when we act in a way that isn't in accordance to our values.
Yes. Yeah.
False guilt is when we're not acting in a way that we think that others think we should, right? We're not
Yeah.
acting in a way that others think we should. So that guilt wasn't even mine, because I was trying to fit into society's expectations. And I don't even think society knows exactly what their expectations are. You need to be this, but don't be too much of this. You need to be that, but don't be that. Like, all
Right.
of these things. And so, one of the best things we can do is go into our own cave, our own body, and say, like, what is it I want and need? What am I feeling called to? Like, what is my knowing telling me?
Yeah.
What works for
Yeah.
my family? And I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do.
I I I heard this conversation around the mom guilt, because
Mm.
I've been the person to be like, yeah, as soon as they're born, it starts, as soon as they come out of the canal, boom. Um, but on We Can Do Hard Things podcast with Glennon Doyle.
Yeah.
And they brought in an expert to talk about mom guilt versus the false guilt, and what's real guilt and what's really just kind of do we take on from society. A great episode, highly recommended if you want
I
to
love
kind of
her.
come to more understanding about mom guilt and false guilt.
Yes.
So we're looking at all the different ways that we've potentially kind of tried to fit in the past. Okay. And to come to, I guess, a reckoning point with that of how have we tried to fit in, what worked, what didn't work, what ultimately though we want to be, in integrity with who we are and belong. So how do we make that shift from fitting in into being ourselves and finding those places that we belong?
Mm. One thing that I like to do is I'm like a list girl. I like lists. I think that's
Yeah,
my
I
type
do
A personality.
too.
But I like to write down what my values are. What are my
Mm,
personal values?
yeah.
What am I into? What am I not? And then I look at some of the relationships in my life that feel off or funny. Like we know what those relationships are, right? We
Yeah.
can feel it. And I start to look at, is this relationship fitting into my values and what I believe in? And
Mm,
does it match my interests? Does it match my passions? Um, and it's really interesting the answers that come up, because sometimes I've noticed I've held on to friendships that weren't bringing me peace. It was like emotional vampires. Like you were giving a lot and they were
yeah.
sucking, as being sucked out of you, but you hold on to it because you've been friends for so long, or
Mm-hmm.
they have a certain thing that you're attracted to, or you sometimes they are the mirror of what you feel that you're not. And so you're drawn to it. And so I just started to evaluate like my relationships. Again, asking myself, like, am I trying to meet their expectations?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I truly showing up as my authentic self and they're loving and accepting me? Am I filtering what I say because I don't want to make them mad or
Mm-hmm.
rock the boat? Or can we have healthy communication? And so
Right.
I just began looking in my life about certain relationships. And I think what happens is we fear the pain of letting certain relationships go, even though we know in the long run it might be for our highest and best.
Well,
It's
it's
like
because
that.
we build stories up around those too.
Mm-hmm,
What this
mm-hmm,
relationship means, what it looks like, all the things that we could do together in the future, and the what it means about me as a person to have this relationship. And so when we let that go, it's this dismantling of these stories, and that's actually one of the most painful parts in any breakup is the
yeah,
dismantling of the stories that we built up around it. So
absolutely. And
yeah.
we tend to attract people who allow us to play the same attachment roles that we've always had to
Mm,
play. So in my experience, the more I've done the reparenting work, the more I've actually had to reevaluate relationships. And what I've noticed is that people will either fall out of your life or they will rise up. The people
mm,
who would, will cheerlead you and say, yes, I want you to have boundaries. But then the moment you set a first boundary, they're like, oh, we can't be friends. Like, this isn't going to work for me. You know,
right.
that might be a relationship that you want to examine and get curious about. Why am I keeping it? What stories am I building about this relationship versus what are the facts? What has life experience shown me about the relationship?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like again in my body? When I think of this person, do I get like warm and fuzzy and like it's just ease, or do I clench and I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling ungrounded? And these are the simple reflection tools that I find helpful and talking to those parts of yourself. Like, for
Yeah.
example, back to my husband, when he's a relationship I'd like to keep. So,
Mhm.
and we have a great relationship, and I can recognize when we pitfall into our wounding. So then I talk to those parts. Oh, hi, part of me who feels rejected.
Mm.
Or I had friendships where I felt like I had to constantly overdo in order to feel loved and worthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, oh, hi, part of me that wants to overdo. There you are again, old friend. And getting curious about why your body has created these protective parts to survive. Like, when did that
Mhm.
narrative start that you better be this version of you in order to feel connected and to survive?
Yeah. That's a great reflection point. And also, like, in my work with couples, when jealousy has come up, like
Mm,
jealousy is often it's that core wounding, right? Every once in a while though, it's something that's actually existing in the realm of the relationship. There's something in the realm of the relationship that is informing this.
mhm.
And so without, deep consciousness around it, it's just like, oh, I'm feeling jealous. And like, it's like, okay, but maybe I'm feeling jealous because, I just never know what my partner's doing. And or they've got like this really close friend that they never talk about, and I just need more information, like, so I think the same thing works with these other aspects of like the trying too hard, or over giving, or all those things. Like sometimes, most of the time, it's about this core wounding. Every once in a while it's about the dynamic in the relationship, so examining that as well. Like, is this person just not emotionally available to me? And
Mhm.
that's why I feel like I need to try so hard to connect with them. Yeah.
And if you're having, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like in my experience, if you're having, if that's the norm for you, that you have to try so hard to fit
Mhm.
in and connect with this person, but then every once in a while you get these quick little connection moments and it gives you that
Mhm.
surge of dopamine, and you're like, see, like we can
Yeah.
connect. And but that that necessarily can be a trauma response in itself, where you're just seeking these small
Yeah.
connection moments when the big circle of it is that's not really what it's built around. We're
Is it enough? Are you getting what you need? I love how it
Yeah.
keeps coming back to, how's it feel in your body? Is this what you need? Is this what you want? Yeah.
And a lot of us don't have memories of our childhood, because
Mhm.
in order to have like a coherent memory, we had to have an adult who put incoherent experiences into coherent narratives. Otherwise, they can't live as a story that we can tell. So I
Wow.
don't
Yeah.
usually invite people to go back to a specific memory. If there's one, great. But a question sometimes I ask is like, how might you have been responded to as a child? What might have happened as a child now that you know
Mm.
that this thing is hard for you today?
Yeah.
Now that I keep getting in these relationships that with these emotionally unavailable people, or like whatever pattern it is, the way that you were parented or those early childhood experiences often become the way that we are partnered. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
all of that really kind of ties back. And just curiosity doesn't mean we're making it wrong. I find it a tool to understand ourselves.
Yeah.
And once we understand and have awareness, then we can make some conscious choices about, do I want to keep going down this path? Um,
Mhm.
when I met my husband, I almost broke up with him because I felt like we had no passion. I had been so used to love hard, fight hard. I grew up in homes where I saw that with my parents on both sides, love hard, fight hard, even after they split. So for me, I sought the relationships where there was love hard, fight hard. And when my husband came along, he wasn't a love hard, fight hard. He was just kind of like a love hard. And I was like, well, we clearly have no passion. This isn't going to work for me.
Yeah.
He is too safe. And then my friend was like, is that such a bad thing that you feel
Yeah.
safe when you're with him? And I was like, wow, disconnection and explosions, fireworks had been so ingrained to me of normal or healthy or
Mm-hmm.
safe or whatever, that sometimes I think when we do get connection, when we're so used to disconnection, that in and of itself can feel like a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I've seen it on the flip side, the dynamic in male female relationships when guys kind of go for the crazy chick a little bit, right? Because the sex is better, and it's
Right,
like, well, okay, do you need that? Do you need and want that emotionally? That intensity in order for it to be good? I don't
right.
think so. Let's challenge that assumption, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've also seen too, like I've heard, well, I mean, he's really not emotionally available, but the sex is so good. We really connect with this during the sex. And I'm like,
Yeah,
if that
yeah,
is your moment of connection, I wonder, is that enough for you? Is that real
right.
connection? Maybe, only they can answer that. But
Yeah.
I find that true connection and true belonging, you don't have to work so hard because you don't have to perform.
It's learning to let go of that performative and the pattern, related, yeah, the pattern that we're so accustomed to. But for anyone listening, since we're talking about relationships, you can have a healthy, nourishing, fantastic sex life with a safe partner.
Yes, you can.
You can find those tools. Those tools are out there, I promise you. Yeah, ultimately, like relationships, like our relationship with our partner and our core family, really, that's one of the hardest places that like the whole fitting in thing comes in, I think, you know.
Yeah. And the more that I, in my experience, have fit in, the more that I have belonged to myself
Mm-hmm.
and done the reparenting work, the more that I feel like I attract people that I belong with and to, and the less I feel the need to try to fit in, the less I feel
Yeah.
so scared about being kicked out of the pack because I've been doing some of the work and there, it's a journey. So it's not like a destination, like I've done the
Yeah,
work
right.
and I'm healed.
We're not all done.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. But as you start to untangle some of those layers and meet them with curiosity and compassion, well, then you start to come back to your true authentic self. That's why I like talking to the parts, those protective parts as they come out, because
Yeah.
then they don't have to be so loud and kind of take a back seat. And your
Mm-hmm.
true aligned self can be the head of the table, the CEO. And the other ones are just supporting actors, right? They're your associates and they can have a say, but they don't have to run the whole ship. And
Yeah.
when you're moving from self, then you can start to build authentic relationships with other people. And perhaps if you are feeling aligned and self love within, because you will never leave you, then, it becomes this opportunity to feel safe, to feel like you are enough, like you are worthy. Not everything you do or say then will become tied to your worth because you know that you are worthy simply because you exist and you're here, you're doing the work.
Yeah. And having those conversations and bringing those little selves, those little defensive selves to the table. Like, I think that, so often that we just try and deny it or shove them or conquer them,
Mhm.
and that just makes them more persistent, right?
Mhm.
They just keep showing up. And next thing we know, something's gone sideways because one of them is acting up because we haven't really addressed it.
It's like
So,
that dramatic child. Like, I don't know. I was always, oh, she's so dramatic. But dramatic kids, they're usually just looking to feel like their experience is real.
Hmm.
And so they will keep elevating their response, their behavior in order to be believed.
Mm.
They're wanting to
Yeah.
feel safe and they're wanting to feel seen. And the same thing with these protective parts or with our
Yeah.
inner child. They're looking for the same thing. And so if we keep ignoring them or we keep exiling them, then they're just going to keep elevating in order to be heard.
Yeah. 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 Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So to reclaim ourselves, noticing these unhealed parts, having conversations with them, discerning what we need and what we want. What else would you say in there?
Well, I'm a fan of mantras.
Mm,
Now, I think mantras can be different than affirmations. Sometimes I have a hard time with affirmations because you can tell yourself like I am love, but if biologically, neurologically you've been kind of conditioned to believe that you are not, it's hard to accept that, right?
yeah.
So, if you want to do an affirmation and the I am statements aren't resonating, a couple variations of that could be, what if I was loved? Or what if I was accepted? Or
Mm,
may I belong? Or like, may I feel comfortable in my skin? Whatever it is for you. So the what if or the may I sometimes is a little
mm-hmm.
more gentler to the nervous system. But as far as mantras, why I enjoy them is because they're rhythmic. They give a
Yeah.
sense of control. Like we can bring them out and use them whenever we need to. And we begin to change our self talk. We begin to change the way our brain is seeing things and what it's looking for. It's like if you said, don't think of a purple elephant, you're thinking of a purple elephant. If I'm constantly thinking that I'm I'm rejected and I am alone and I'm crazy and nobody understands me, we will start to look for situations to confirm that. We will
Yep.
see situations and be like, yep, see, there I am. They don't
Yep.
understand me.
Proof,
So,
proof, proof. Let me prove
yeah.
my stories in my head. Yep. I'm going to find ways to validate those suckers one way or another.
So, I like to say mantras or affirmations using an adaption there if my body's not ready to receive it. Don't think I don't
Yeah.
have sticky notes all over. And you know what? We teach that. And I love that because then my kids are modeling that too.
Yeah.
They are giving themselves little notes or telling themselves things that they need to hear. And I think it's important that our kids see that we're working on it too. Like I let my
Yeah.
kids know often, I don't have it figured out. I'm learning too. Here's what I know or what I think I know based upon my experience. Your
Yeah.
experiences will tell you something too. And it's okay to use tools, because learning to love yourself for most of us isn't natural. We've kind of been pulled away from that
Yeah.
in the name of fitting in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really like mantras and affirmations.
Yeah. And, you brought up a great point about the affirmations because affirmations have been a long-standing tool of mine. And, you know, I used to say that, the more we think these things, the deeper the thoughts go in our brains. And sometimes it's like those prairie, the wagons going across the prairies and they get stuck in the ruts. And what if they needed to make a hard left? Then they need to
Right.
use a lever to pop it out of the rut and create a new path. And that's really ultimately what these affirmations and mantras do. But with that caveat that if it's so completely opposite of your internal experience and you're hardwired to not believe that on a physiological, in that brain of yours, then what could you kind of ish believe? What's maybe not the exact opposite. Let's scale it back to the first rung on the ladder.
Or maybe your whole
Um,
body doesn't accept it, but maybe your pinky will, or your big
right.
toe will, or,
Yeah.
have a
Right.
little fun with
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's okay that you don't go straight for I fully love and appreciate myself, but maybe, in this moment, I know I'll figure this out, you
Mhm.
know. Yeah.
I like to say to myself when I notice old stories popping up or I'm feeling rejected is I love getting in nature, like taking off my shoes and grounding. Um,
Hmm.
and I bring my hand to my heart and I might say something like, "This feels hard and I can cope. This feeling is part of me, it's not all of me."
Yeah.
And I find in my body that helps to create some safety. I I sometimes say I feel safe, but honestly, in those moments of feeling rejected, it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning of it really does create this primal panic inside your body. And so in that moment, I actually don't feel safe.
Yeah.
Maybe I am safe. I'm standing barefoot in my subdivision on my, grassed front yard. There's not any physical threats, but that emotional pain is just as significant and raw and telling. And so in those moments, I just remind myself that this is hard and I can cope. Experience has
Yeah.
shown me that I've been able to cope with it for 37 years. And I think I'm 38, actually. I don't know. I think 38. I'm 38. However long I am.
Somewhere in there.
You know, and so I find that to be really just a way to kind of bring me back into my body because so often when we're experiencing pain, for some of us, we've learned to disassociate.
Yeah.
And so, could I gently bring myself back into my body and remind myself that this is hard, like validate it,
Hmm.
and then acknowledge that I can cope, that it's part of me, but it's not all of me?
Yeah. Love that. And there are ways to create a sense of safety within ourselves. There are some tools and there's some somatic things that we can do to learn this sense of safety
Mm.
within ourselves. So I highly recommend, anyone that's watching to check those out. I know in the previous summit, Michelle Fleming did a great job sharing a couple of those tools. But check out some somatic stuff on creating a safe space within your own central nervous system, and I think you'll be rewarded in that because it's really helped me
Totally.
quite a bit. So, Ashley, any final thoughts? And I want to make sure that we tell people how to find you.
Yeah. I suppose that if you were only to take one thing from our time together, is that fitting in is not, I'm losing my train of thought. Fitting in is really not the goal. Belonging perhaps is. And you're enough as you are.
Mm,
And so the thing that I like to say, and I really deeply mean it, is like, you make sense, you make sense, you make sense.
mm,
Everything you struggle with, it makes sense. Anything that has gotten you here today, it makes sense for you. And the more that you are able to go back to that authentic self of yours, the more you will draw in more authentically aligned people.
mm,
And just
mm-hmm,
because this is where I was going, just because you may not fit in with a particular person or particular group, it doesn't directly mean that your self-worth, or it's not related to your self-worth. It doesn't mean that you're not worthy or enough. Sometimes
right.
we just have to shift our view and notice there's plenty other branches on the tree that we can connect with.
Probably
And
has nothing to do with you. Maybe it's just that group or that person and their nonsense, because we
yeah,
all got nonsense.
yes.
Okay, Ashley, tell folks how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, which is parentsdoingbetter.com. You'll find all of my social media handles there. You can book a free consultation so we can chat, or the Is This Normal parenting session. And then my email address is hello@parentsdoingbetter.com.
Fantastic. And you have a giveaway for people
Ah,
watching the summit.
Yes, yes. So I'm offering 50% off on an
Wow.
empathic witnessing session, which is where we will do this deep reparative work and this validative work with your inner child.
Mm.
It's usually a $200 price point, so we're going to go with $100 there. And also, same for the Is This Normal Conscious Parenting session, where we will talk about your parenting triggers, the origin story of them, your patterns, and begin to develop some new tools. And again, that is a $200 price point. I'm taking 50% off for anybody
Wow.
who's witnessing it through this
Such a
summit.
great give. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So obviously Ashley is awesome. Check her out, follow her, work with her because the world needs more integration and
Yeah.
self-awareness and a good dose of reparenting. So thank you, Ashley, for
Thank
being here.
you. Thank you so much. It was so much fun.